Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in Indian philosophy we will be talking about the Vedic philosophy. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Ms. Sanchi Chaudhary. Ms. Chaudhary is Assistant Professor in Department of Philosophy in Gargi College, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome ma'am to our studios and request her to start the lecture. Welcome ma'am.
I would be presenting a lecture today on the Vedic philosophy. The Vedas are the earliest Hindu sacred writings. They are also perhaps the oldest scriptures in recorded human history, dating to as early as 1500 to 800 BC. Even the origin of Indian philosophy may be easily traced in the Vedas. However, due to the absence of proper chronological data, indifference of ancient Indians towards personal histories, and the problems related to the proper interpretation of Vedic Sanskrit has made the knowledge about this period ambiguous and hazy. The term Ved means a text containing knowledge about the nature of ultimate reality and the proper human ways of relating to it. It is generally supposed that the Vedas were not composed by ordinary human beings. They are instead considered to be either taught by God to the sages or were the revelations of ancient seers as a result of intense meditation. So, the general assumption about the Vedas is that they are handed down through word of mouth from a period of antiquity. The two important aspects about the Vedas which needs to be discussed are, firstly, the Vedas are regarded as apaurushaya, which means not composed by ordinary beings. That is to say that the Vedas are authorless, infallible and eternal. Secondly, the Vedas are called the Shruti text, that is, knowledge compiled from hearing the words of wisdom, unlike Smriti text, which means knowledge compiled from remembering the words of wisdom. Now let us proceed and discuss the classification of the Vedas, which are four in number, namely Rig Ved, Sam Ved, Yajur Ved and Atharva Ved. The first three Vedas, that is the Rig Ved, Sam Ved and Yajur Ved, not only agree in form and language but in their content as well. However, out of the four Vedas, the Rig Ved is the oldest, largest and the most important of the Vedic collection. It comprises of the hymns of praise meant for recitation. The Sam Ved consists of melodies for chanting, though much of the verses of the Sam Ved are found in the Rig Ved as well, but are different with respect to arrangement. Yajur Ved provides the knowledge of the sacrificial formulas meant for religious services. The sacrificial formulas are partly in prose and partly in verse, arranged in order in which they were to be used at the time of sacrifices. The last of the four Vedas is called Atharva Ved, which for a long time did not enjoy the prestige of the Veda as it comprises of magical formulas and incantations. Now, after understanding the classification of the Vedas, let us proceed towards the structure of the Vedas. The Vedas comprises of the following four parts, namely mantras or hymns which were addressed to gods and goddesses. A collection of mantras or hymns is called Samhita. Brahmanas or the ritual text which include precepts and religious duties. They explain how a ritual is to be performed at the time of different sacrifices. Aranyakas or the forest treatises are considered to be the concluding portion of the Brahmanas. It comprises of the reflection of men belonging to the third stage of life called Vanaprastha. These treatises represent a transition from Brahmanas to the Upanishads, that is, the transition from ritualistic to philosophical thought. Upanishads or Vedant is the concluding portion of the Vedas. It contains mature philosophical and spiritual ideas and may be rightly regarded as the true essence and the cream of the Vedic philosophy. The mantras and the Brahmanas are together called Karm Kand, or the portion dealing with the sacrificial actions. The Aranyakas and the Upanishads are together called Gyan Kand, or the portion dealing with knowledge. However, some scholars of Indian philosophy include Aranyakas in Karm Kand as they only represent a transition from Karm Kand to Gyan Kand. It can be said from the above discussion that as far as the Vedic period is concerned, there is a gradual development of the philosophical thought from the mantras and the brahmanas through the Aranyakas and to the Upanishads. There are many scholars of Indian philosophy who call the mantras portion as the religion of nature of the poets, the Brahmanas ritualism, the religion of laws of the priest, the Upanishadic portion, the religion of spirit of the philosophers. Let us now understand the place of the Vedas in Indian philosophy. Indian philosophy has been intensely spiritual and has always emphasized the need for practical realization of truth. It stands for direct, immediate and intuitive vision of reality, the actual perception of truth, and also includes the means which leads to this realization. The quest for truth consists of three activities, namely Shravan, which means hearing the words of the teacher, as during that time books were not available. Manan means intellectual conviction after critical analysis, or in simple words, thinking over the meanings of the words of the teacher. Nididhyasan means practical realization or meditation over truths realized after critical analysis. The last activity includes both reason and discussion. At this stage, one may rightly or wrongly come to different conclusions and reject or accept the reality of the Supreme Being and of the Spirit in man. It needs to be noted that the quest was for the nature of reality and the ideal of life. However, the way of realizing it in almost all the schools of Indian philosophy was through these three activities just discussed. However, the Vedas greatly influenced all the schools of Indian philosophy either positively or negatively. Some of the philosophical systems accepted Vedic authority while others opposed it. The schools which accepted the authority of the Vedas are called orthodox or astic. Mimamsa, Vedant, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya and Visheshak are all classified as astic. Out of these 6 schools of Indian philosophy, Mimamsa and Vedant are schools directly based on the Vedic text. It has just been discussed that the Vedic tradition has 2 sides, ritualistic and speculative. Mimamsa emphasized the ritualistic aspect and evolved from the earlier portions of the Vedas, comprising of the mantras and the brahmanas. So, with respect to this, it is called Purva Mimamsa. Another name for Mimamsa is Karm Mimamsa, since it also discusses the nature of action. Vedant, on the other hand, emphasizes the speculative aspect of the Vedas and developed an elaborate philosophy from the later portions of the Vedas, that is, the Upanishads. So, with respect to this, it is also called Uttar Mimamsa. However, this school is also called Gyan Mimamsa as it speculates the nature of ultimate reality. The other astic schools like Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Visheshak based their theories on ordinary human experience and reasoning. They did not challenge the authority of the Vedas but tried to show that the testimony of the Vedas was quite in harmony with their rationally established theories. Apart from these 6 schools of Indian philosophy, there are 3 other schools which completely reject the authority of the Vedas. They are called Nastic or heterodox. The Charvak, Buddhism and Jainism arose mainly as an opposition to the Vedic culture and therefore did not accept the authority of the Vedas. Now, let us move on to understand the development of Vedic philosophy. Indian philosophy started with the Vedic tradition, where even some earliest parts of the Vedas, called the hymns, highlight some important abstract ideas. Like, for example, the Nasadiya Sukt, which discusses the concept of being and not being. The hymns of the Rig Veda indicate the necessity of sacrifices, which were addressed to various natural forces like sun, moon, wind, sky, etc., which were understood as different gods. This period can be marked as naturalistic and subscribed to anthropomorphic polytheism. The Vedic tradition further developed with the worship of each of the deities as the supreme deity, the other being its manifestations. This, according to P.T. Raju, is called henotheism. Raju further explains that during this stage of development, it was already understood that the universe is an interrelated whole and the plurality of independent gods leads only to chaos. So, a supreme deity was required to control the activities of others. However, there is ambiguity regarding who this supreme deity is. P.T. Raju further clarifies that henotheism took two forms. Firstly, man worshipped different deities on different occasions as supreme deity and the rest as its forms. That is to say, for several decades, man would worship one god as supreme god and then dethrone him and worship another at his place. The names of such gods are Varun, who at one time was the god who surrounded the world and controlled the moral law, or Rit, but later became the god of oceans. Vishnu was originally solar god, but later became Godhead or Brahman, taking incarnations for maintaining the world. Prajapati, the lord of the living beings, who also later became the creator and custodian of knowledge and learning. Secondly, the term henotheism also understands supreme deity as the unity of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer, and Shiva, the destroyer. There arose a controversy later as to who is the most important out of the three. Like, for example, the followers of Shaivism claimed that it was Shiva. The followers of Vaishnavism claimed that it was Vishnu. The Vedic period after this saw gradual development of monism, which also marks the movement of man towards inwardization. At this stage, Brahman becomes the supreme Atman or the universal spirit. This is considered to be the highest reality, ultimate truth, and its realization leads to the spiritual upliftment of man. Thus, the study of the Vedas is necessary for the proper understanding of the practices and philosophies of Indo-Aryans. This was the first effort of the human mind to comprehend and express the mystery of the world. The hymns of the Vedas speculate the questions related to the origin and creation of the world. Let us now systematically understand the general teachings and importance of the Vedas. The entire Vedic text, excluding Upanishads, is said to deal with dharma or acts of duty, of which the chief are sacrifices. There are 4 samhitas, namely Rig, Sam, Yajur and Atharva, which are said to be compiled for the smooth performance of the sacrifices. The Vedas in general have a strong priestly bias as different priestly class had the monopoly in the addition and transmission of the texts. So, with respect to this, a Vedic sacrifice requires 4 types of priest. The first one is called Hot, who addresses hymns in praise of God to invoke their presence and participation in the sacrifice. The second is Udghata, who sings the hymn in melodious tunes to entertain and please the gods. The third one is Adhvaryu, who performs the sacrifice according to the strict ritualistic code and gives offerings to the gods. Brahma, who is the general supervisor and is well versed in the Vedas. Thus, the four Samhitas are said to be compiled to fulfill the needs of the four priests. Thus, mantras and Samhitas represent hymnology addressed to gods and goddesses. The Vedas also provide a detailed discussion on the values and the ways of life. The four main values of life or Purusharthas are Arth or wealth, Kam or pleasure, Dharma or ethical merit, Moksha or liberation. The Vedas teaches the way man ought to plan his life for the realization of an ideal. There are three ways by means of which the ideal can be realized, namely Karma Marg or the way of action, Bhakti Marg or the way of devotion, Gyan Marg or the way of knowledge. The Vedas also discusses some highly abstract concepts which also helped in the philosophical development of other Indian schools of thought, both positively and negatively. The ideas of Purush and Prakriti are integral to Sankhya philosophy. The concept of Maya is extremely important for the Vedantins. The term Atman and Brahman is significant to almost all the schools of Indian philosophy in one way or the other. It has already been discussed that there was a gradual development in the philosophy of Vedas. The scholars of Indian philosophy like Radhakrishnan with respect to this notice a transition from the naturalistic and the anthropomorphic polytheism through transcendent monotheism to eminent monism in pre-Upanishadic philosophy. The personified forces of nature first changed into real gods and later on became mere forms of one personal or transcendental god who was the custodian of moral and cosmic order, who later on passed into eminent Purush. The aim of Upanishads was to develop this Purush to Brahman or Atman, which is both transcendent and immanent. It also needs to be noticed that the proper study and understanding of the Vedas necessarily require grasp of a number of subsidiary studies, namely phonetics or Siksha, ceremonial or Kalp, grammar or Vyakaran, etymology or Nirukt, prosody or Chand, astronomy and astrology or Evotish. Apart from these six, there are four secondary subsidiary studies, namely epics or Puranas, logic or Nyaya, rules of textual criticism or Mimamsa, ethical codes or Dharma Shastra. They were important for the smooth performance of sacrifices in terms of proper chanting of the hymns with absolute precision and conducting the rituals with absolute accuracy. These subsidiary studies later on developed as independent philosophies. Like for example, the schools of grammarians was founded by Panini and developed by Bhartrihari expounds the philosophy of grammar. Logic was developed by Gautam, who founded an independent school of thought called Nyaya. The Vedic way of life was developed by the understanding of the epics. Now, let us move on to discuss further the concluding portions of the Vedas called the Upanishads. The word Upanishad means to sit down near a teacher in a devoted manner in order to receive philosophical instructions about the highest reality. The study of the Upanishads helps to destroy the ignorance of the disciple by introducing the central ideas of Brahman. The theme of Upanishads is the escape from rebirth through knowledge of the underlying reality of the universe. There is a controversy regarding the date and number of Upanishads. It is generally believed that there are a total number of 108 Upanishads who got their names from the various schools and sects who were studying them. Some of the central Upanishads are Ken Upanishad, Ish Upanishad, Kat Upanishad, Munduka Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Aitreya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, etc. to name a few. The Upanishads develop the ideas scattered in the Samhitas regarding the oneness of reality. In the Brahmanas, the philosophical ideas were completely overlooked and only ritualistic sacrifices were emphasized. However, the understanding of both Brahmanas and Aranyakas were important for the purification of mind in order to receive the real teachings about Brahman. So, in the Chandogya Upanishad, sage Narad tells Sanat Kumar, quotes open, I know Rig, Ved, Sam, Yajur Ved. With all these, I know only the mantras and the sacred text. I do not know the self. I have heard from people like you that only he who knows about the self goes beyond sorrow. Quotes closed. Also, in the Munduka Upanishad, it has been discussed that there are two kinds of knowledge, namely the higher and the lower. The lower knowledge is that of the words of Rig, Sam, Yajur and Atharva Ved, but the higher knowledge is that by which Brahman is known. Now let us understand in a systematic way the importance of the teachings of Upanishads, which are, firstly, the Upanishads aim at explaining the nature of Atman and direct inquiry towards it. The Mandukya Upanishad analyzes the four states of the Atman. The first is called waking state or Vishwa, where the Atman enjoys gross objects and is conscious about the external world. The second is called dreaming state or Tejas, where the Atman enjoys subtle objects and is conscious of the internal world. The Atman creates its own imaginary object as its state. The third is called sound sleep or Pragya, where there is an absence of both gross and subtle objects. Here, the subject-object duality is transcended, due to which we see only a glimpse of supreme bliss. The fourth state is the Atman in its purity, called Turya. At this stage, the ignorance completely gets destroyed due to pure consciousness. Here, the subject-object duality does not exist, due to which there exists positive bliss. Turya can only be realized directly and intuitively. Even the Chandogya Upanishad develops the concept of Atman in the same way as Mandukya Upanishad. It states that there is a development of the self from bodily self through the empirical or dreaming self, and the self in deep, dreamless sleep to the absolute self. A very famous passage of the Mandukya Upanishad highlights this. Indra and Virochan were sent to Prajapati to learn about the nature of the self. Prajapati asked them to undergo training for 32 years to qualify themselves to receive this teaching. They do so and return to Prajapati after that. Then Prajapati explained them that the self is that which is seen when one looks into another's eye or into water or mirror. Virochan was satisfied and he left, but not Indra, who questioned Prajapati that how can self be the reflection of the body, or how can it be identified with the body? That is to say, if the self is beautiful, then the body is beautiful, or if the self is well dressed, then the body is well dressed, or if the self is lame, then the body is also lame, or if the self perishes, the body also perishes. In response to this, Prajapati says, self is he who is seen roaming freely, that is, the dreaming subject is the self. Indra is again dissatisfied and questions Prajapati, who says, though self is without bodily defects, not perishing along with the body, yet it appears as if the self feels afraid and terrified, as if it is being chased. This analysis too did not satisfy Indra, who again goes back to Prajapati with doubts. Prajapati then tells him that the enjoyer of dreamless sleep is the self. But Indra finds this difficult to understand, as the self in deep sleep reduces itself to mere abstractions. Here there is no object to be felt, to be known, and to be enjoyed. Prajapati gets pleased with this analysis of Indra and teaches him the true nature of the self, which is, quotes open, the body is not the self, though it exists for the self. Dream experiences are not the self, but have meaning only for the self. Self is not an abstract formal principle of deep dreamless sleep too. So the self is immortal, self-luminous, self-proved, and beyond doubt. In the Kat Upanishad as well, the Atman is said to be the ultimate reality. It explains the notion of Atman with the help of a simile called the simile of the chariot. According to this simile, the objects are the roads, the body is the chariot, the senses are the horses, the mind is the reins of the horses, the intellect is the charioteer, the ego is the enjoyer, and the Atman is the Lord sitting on the chariot, which is the ultimate reality. The Kat Upanishad asserts that one who does not use his power of reasoning, whose senses are unruly and mind uncontrolled, then his life would drift towards chaos and confusion, and his existence would get entangled in the physical world. I would like to stop here. Thank you. I would be discussing the nature of Atman in Kat Upanishad. In the Kat Upanishad, the Atman is said to be the ultimate reality. It explains the notion of Atman with the help of the simile of the chariot. According to the simile, the objects are the roads, the body is the chariot, the senses are the horses, the mind is the reins of the horses, the intellect is the charioteer, the ego is the enjoyer, and the Atman is the Lord sitting on the chariot, which is ultimate reality. The Kat Upanishad asserts that one who does not use his powers of reasoning, whose senses are unruly and mind uncontrolled, then his life would drift towards chaos and confusion, and his existence would get entangled in the physical world. But those who use their intelligence have their senses calm and under reason. They live a life of bliss and liberation. Thus, the Upanishads highlights the importance of the nature of Atman. Secondly, the Upanishads also explains the nature of Brahman. The Taittiriya Upanishad defines Brahman as that from which all beings are born, by which they live and into which they are reabsorbed. It is considered to be both logically and ontologically prior to everything and therefore is the origin of everything. The Brahman is the creator, sustainer or destroyer of the world. The best qualities are attributed to it and in that sense it is called Sagun. However, this Brahman is also called the lower Brahman. It is real only with respect to the empirical world, which itself is unreal. On the other hand, the knowledge of the higher Brahman is considered to be the absolute reality. The higher Brahman, to the contrary, is indeterminate, qualityless or nirgun. Thirdly, the Upanishads also explain the relation between Brahman and Atman. According to the teachings of the Upanishads, the same reality from the subjective side is called Atman and the same reality from the objective side is called Brahman. There are 5 Mahavakyas given in different Upanishads which bring out the relation between Brahman and Atman. They are as follows. First, Atman is Brahman. Second, I am Brahman. Third, all this is Brahman. Fourth, Brahman is truth, consciousness, infinite. And fifth, that thou art or Tattvamasi. The 5 Mahavakyas discusses the absolute, manifests itself as the subject as well as the object and transcends them both. Fourthly, the Upanishads also discusses the nature of Maya or ignorance. The Kat Upanishad states that people live in ignorance about ultimate reality and thinking themselves to be wise, wander like blind men following blind. It discusses the nature of Maya with respect to the world. The world is a cosmic illusion, that is, it appears to be real but is not. The only reality is Brahman. Hence, to conclude, the ideas of the Vedas and the Upanishads are extremely important for the understanding of the ultimate reality and also in order to direct the inquirer towards the realization of ultimate reality. Thus, the philosophy of the Vedas and the Upanishads are Atman-centered and oriented by the notion of Brahman. It is also to be noted that the knowledge of Atman and Brahman is beyond ordinary speech and thought and can only be realized negatively by the principle of neti neti or by using negative terms. The understanding of the concept of Maya is significant for the realization of ignorance which surrounds human beings pertaining to ultimate reality. Thus, the Vedas and the Upanishads are a collection of several philosophical doctrines which are essential for the growth and development of Indian philosophy. With this, I end my lecture. Thank you.
Ma'am, if I have few questions for you for that. What in essence do you think is a Vedic philosophy?
Basically, just in few words, it's very difficult to summarize the essence of Vedic philosophy. But otherwise, if I can say, Indian philosophy entirely evolved out of Vedic philosophy only. So there are 9 schools of Indian philosophy which I discussed in my lecture. All the important doctrines, whether metaphysical, epistemological or the ethical doctrines of all these 9 schools have directly or indirectly evolved out of the Vedic literature. Now also Vedic literature, very interestingly, it's considered to be authorless, because of which it is known that it was authorless, meaning that it was not composed by ordinary people. So there is no possibility of any mistakes, and hence they are considered to be eternal and absolute, and hence the teachings go on from there.
So, in other words, if one has to actually stretch the idea of authorless, we would also say that by authorless we mean it was not written by one person, it was evolved over a period of time, over hundreds of years, and that's how Vedic philosophy has been evolved like a big banyan tree, that it has a small beginning and ended up being a huge one. In that sense, ma'am, if we look at the Vedic philosophy, my question is, since you have also mentioned that we start with very naturalistic idea of God, we start with, and at the end of it, when we reach to the level of Upanishad, which is 6th century AD, we are talking about somewhere there, Brihaspati. That the Brihaspati Puranas was written by that time. Till then, Vedic philosophy has evolved in the sense that from naturalistic we are more internalizing it and making it philosophical, and actually making the God more human like than from the nature like. That the God is changing his face from, say, from natural God to a very human kind of a God. And do you think this is how it is also the case, that how the Vedas evolved eventually, that we actually started viewing God in people? We started from nature, and when we started looking at in people, and then in murtis, in idols, we started looking for God.
Okay, so there are two things as far as your question is concerned. So I'll start with the first one. So as far as the evolution of the Vedas is concerned, now Vedas, as I said, they are authorless. So how are they compiled? They were compiled as Shruti text, which means that, they were the words of wisdom which were heard, and after being heard, they were compiled by various sages. Also, people maintain that maybe they were revelations which happened as a result of intense meditations which these selected seers would be performing or would be doing, and they are unlike the Smriti texts which are remembered. Now, as far as the evolution of gods and goddesses is concerned in the Vedas, it's only in the earlier part of the Vedas where the anthropomorphic explanation is given. Initially, it starts with the natural explanation of gods and goddesses, like for example, sun was made a god, moon was made a god, oceans were recognized as god. But later on, people started realizing that this is very, very chaotic. It would not lead them to the knowledge of the ultimate reality, and hence they started talking about unity. So in a way, initially it was polytheism, then it came down to monism. Now monism happens only in the Upanishadic stage, where it is considered to be highly philosophical, where they start talking about the concept of Brahman. Now Brahman is no anthropomorphic god, it is no god, it is no deity, it is considered to be absolute truth, absolute reality, which we have to realize by making our individual self one with Brahman. So that happens with a lot of training, and this training has been prescribed by the various Astic schools of Indian philosophy, primarily Vedant and primarily Shankar's Vedant, so to speak.
And in that sense, if I have actually can refine the thing that I was about to say, that if obviously then you are actually making a distinction between, say, what Sanatan Dharma is all about and what Vedic Dharma is all about. Are you making a distinction between the Sanatan Dharma, how it evolved, the idol worship, the Trimurti and the Shakt sect which developed later on? I am actually refraining from using the word Hinduism. I would rather use Sanatan instead. Would you be making a distinction between the two?
All I want to say is that as far as Hinduism is concerned and as far as the Vedic philosophy is concerned, we are only picking out the philosophical side of the Hinduism as a religion, so to speak, and not getting down to the other technicalities of the Sanatan Dharma, but it's only highlight. As far as philosophy is concerned, my lecture was strictly about the philosophical aspect of the Vedas.
So you will be saying that Vedic philosophy is in a sense Hindu philosophy?
Inspired from Hindu philosophy, yes, I would be saying that.
Okay. Ma'am, then the another question I have is that in the case of the Shat Darshan you talked about, and apart from that the Nastic schools you talk about, how far do you think the Sankhya school is Astic?
Okay, now see, as far as the term Astic and Nastic is concerned, usually people think that astic and nastic is associated with the beliefs in gods and goddesses. So theist and atheist is what is considered to be astic and nastic. However, as far as Indian philosophy is concerned, it's primarily based on whether a school believes in the authority of the Vedas or it rejects the authority of the Vedas. Okay. Now, as far as Sankhya school is concerned, directly it is not based on the teachings of the Vedas. However, the doctrines or the philosophical aspects which Sankhya school usually talks about, like for example the duality of the Purush and the Prakriti, where Purush is lame without Prakriti and Prakriti is blind without Purush. So here all these aspects are in harmony with the Vedic teachings and the content of the Vedas, primarily the Upanishads. So there is a sort of a harmony there. However, I would not say that Sankhya school is directly based on the Vedas, primarily the Upanishads.
Okay, ma'am. And the last question I have is, you said that epics are kind of Purans. Puran is something like Bhagavad Puran.
That's right.
Puran is something like Vishnu Puran. How would Mahabharata or Ramayana be Puran? How would you explain that?
Okay, so as far as the epics are concerned, now these epics are only basically, they just glorify the various incarnations of gods and goddesses. So basically, initially it started with, glorification of the gods and goddesses and reciting hymns, so on and so forth. Chanting hymns, so on and so forth. So here basically these epics, they are only considered to be the secondary studies required for the absolute understanding of the Vedas. So only in that sense epics are important as far as the philosophical aspects are concerned.
Okay. On that note, I would like to thank ma'am for this very interesting discussion, and I hope that friends that you have found this discussion very enriching, and it must have had you must have had got the clear idea what the Vedic philosophy is all about, what we understand by the evolution of Vedic philosophy. And on that note, I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.